Serious former nice guys of Reddit, when and how did you change? I wasn't always the guy I am today. I used to be one of those guys who thought relationships were like a game, and if you played your cards right, eventually, you'd win the prize. And by prize, I mean the girl. It sounds awful, doesn't it? But I didn't think of it that way back then. Growing up, I had this idea drilled into my head that if I was nice, helpful, and attentive enough, eventually the girl I liked would notice me, and things would just click into place like one of those cheesy rom-coms. The ones where the awkward guy finally gets the girl in the end because he's been there for her all along, secretly pining and waiting for his moment. I guess it all started in high school, where I fell for this girl, Sarah. She was the kind of girl who seemed to float through life, always smiling, always surrounded by people. She had this energy that just drew people in. And I was no exception. I convinced myself that if I could just be the nicest guy she knew, the most dependable, always there with a shoulder to cry on or an ear to listen, she'd eventually see me for what I was. The perfect boyfriend material. I made sure to be there when she needed help with her homework, gave her rides home when her car broke down, and even stayed up all night talking to her on the phone after her boyfriend at the time had broken her heart. In my mind, I was doing everything right. I was playing the long game, waiting for her to have this epiphany and realize that I was the one she should be with. But of course, that's not what happened. She started dating some other guy, someone who wasn't constantly bending over backwards for her, and I was crushed. I remember feeling so betrayed, like the universe had played a cruel joke on. I'd put in all this effort, been the best version of myself, and for what? To be left on the sidelines again? It was a pattern that kept repeating itself throughout college. Different girls, but always the same story. I'd be the guy who'd listen to them talk about their problems, who'd help them move apartments, who'd plan these thoughtful little gestures. And when they'd inevitably start dating some other guy, I'd feel that same frustration, that same sense of being wronged. It was like I was doing everything society had taught me to do, but the universe just wasn't holding up its end of the bargain. I didn't understand it. I thought there must be something wrong with me. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't being nice enough. So I kept pushing, kept trying to be even more attentive, more help. But the harder I tried, the more exhausting it became. It was like running on a treadmill that was gradually speeding up, and no matter how fast I ran, I was getting nowhere. It wasn't just frustrating, it was disheartening. I started to resent the girls I liked, which, looking back, is kind of messed up. But that's what happens when you think you're owed something and you're not getting it. It's like I was building up this huge emotional debt in my mind, thinking that at some point they'd have to pay it back. That's not how attraction works, and it took me a long time to figure that out. I remember one night, sitting in my tiny college apartment, staring at the ceiling, just feeling completely empty. I just found out that this girl I'd been pining over for months had started dating some guy she'd met at a party. She hadn't even mentioned him to me before. It was like I didn't even exist in her world outside of our friendship. And that hurt, more than I care to admit. I got up, paced around my apartment for a bit, and then, for some reason, I started writing. It wasn't like I was a writer or anything, but I needed to get all this frustration out of my head. I wrote pages and pages of angry, confused, bitter ramblings. I wrote about how unfair it all was, how I'd been such a good guy and still ended up alone, how the universe owed me something for all the effort I'd put in. I'm pretty sure I even called myself a nice guy at one point, like that was supposed to mean something. The next morning I woke up, read what I'd written, and felt embarrassed. Not just because it was whiny and pathetic, but because it sounded so entitled. Who the hell was I to think I deserved something just for being nice? Wasn't that what being nice was supposed to be about? Doing things without expecting anything in return? Doing things. That realization hit me hard. I'd spent so much time trying to be this perfect guy, but it wasn't out of genuine kindness or caring. It was out of this twisted sense of entitlement. I thought I was being selfless. But really, I was being selfish in the most insidious way possible. It was like my whole worldview just crumbled in an instant, and all that was left was this raw, uncomfortable truth. I wasn't a nice guy. I was just pretending to be one, hoping it would get me what I wanted. It's weird how something so simple can be such a game changer. It was like this massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I didn't have to be that guy. I didn't have to try so hard, didn't have to put on this act. It wasn't about being a nice guy or a bad boy or any of that. It was just about being real, being genuine. And if that wasn't enough for someone, well, that was their problem, not mine. The big change for me happened when I was about 18 or 19. Right at the start of college. It was like I finally woke up to the fact that I was wasting so much of my energy on people who didn't feel the same way about me. I had been bending over backwards, doing all these favors for girls I liked, hoping that somehow, they'd see what a great guy I was and fall. It was pathetic, but at the time it felt like the only strategy I knew. One night, I was at this party, not really a wild one, more like a small get-together in someone's cramped dorm room. I was there with a group of people I kind of knew but wasn't really close to, just trying to fit in and maybe make some friends. I'd had my eye on this girl, Emily, for a while. She was one of those really smart, driven types who always seemed like she had her together, and I, well, didn't. I was just some freshman trying to figure out what the hell I was doing. So Emily was there, sitting on this ratty old couch, talking to a friend about how she was moving into a new apartment the following weekend. The old me would have jumped at the chance to offer my help, get in her good graces, you know? But something stopped me. I realized that she hadn't even looked my way once all night, hadn't included me in the conversation or shown any interest in me at all, beyond just being polite. It hit me like a ton of bricks that she didn't care about me in that way, probably didn't even think about me outside of the times we happened to be in the same room. Instead of offering to help, I just listened for a bit longer and then wandered off to get another drink. I think that was the first time I consciously chose not to throw myself at someone in hopes they'd notice me. And you know what? Felt good. It felt like I was finally putting myself first, even if it was in a small way. After that night, I started paying more attention to how I was spending my time and who I was spending it on. I realized that for so long, I'd been doing things for other people that they didn't ask for, didn't need, and didn't even really appreciate. All these favors, all these thoughtful gestures. It wasn't genuine kindness. It was me trying to earn something, whether it was affection, attention, or just validation. I was trying to buy love, basically, and when I didn't get it, I felt cheated, like I'd been ripped off. I remember this one girl, Jess, who I'd had a massive crush on in one of my classes. She was always talking about how much she struggled with statistics, and the old me would have offered to tutor her right off the bat, thinking that spending all that time together would make her see me different. But after that party, after that realization, I didn't. I just gave her a couple of study tips and wished her luck, and it was like this weight was lifted off me because I wasn't tying my self-worth to whether or not she liked me. It wasn't easy to make that change. I had to keep reminding myself that I didn't owe anyone anything just because I liked them. It was like breaking a habit, like trying to quit smoking or something. Every time I felt that urge to offer my help, to go out of my way to do something for someone just because I thought it might make them like me, I had to stop and ask myself why I was doing it. Was it because I genuinely wanted to help? Or was it because I was hoping to get something out of it? And let me tell you, it was a shock to realize how often it was the latter. It made me feel kind of gross, to be honest. I had always thought of myself as a good guy, a nice guy. But what I was really doing was trying to manipulate people in this sneaky, underhanded way. It wasn't overt or malicious, but it was still manipulation. I was pretending to be selfless, but I was just a different kind of selfish. Once I started seeing things that way, I couldn't unsee them. I started pulling back from people I'd been bending over backwards for, and you know what? Most of them didn't even notice. They just moved on to the next person who would do things for them. It was eye-opening. I'd been killing myself trying to be indispensable to these people, and it turned out they didn't even care. I was just a convenience. An easy way to get what they needed without having to give anything in return. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it was also liberating. I started focusing more on myself, on what I wanted out of life, instead of what I thought I had to do to get people to like me. I spent more time with friends who actually valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. I got more serious about my studies, picked up a couple of hobbies I'd always been interested in but never had the time for because I was too busy trying to impress people. One day I ran into Emily on campus. We hadn't talked since that party, and she was struggling with this big stack of boxes trying to get them into her car. The old me would have jumped in, helped her load them up, and then probably offered to help her unpack them too. But instead I just said hi, asked her how she was doing. She didn't even remember my name, which kind of stung, but I just shrugged it off and went on my way. That was a real turning point. I wasn't angry at her or at myself. I didn't feel like I'd missed some big opportunity to make her like me. I was just fine, and that was huge. I realized that I didn't have to tie myself up in knots trying to be someone I wasn't, didn't have to keep jumping through hoops hoping someone would throw me a bone. I could just be me, and that was enough. Looking back, a lot of why I fell into that nice guy trap was because I didn't have a solid male role model around to show me what healthy relationships looked like. My dad wasn't in the picture. He split when I was a kid, and I have this vague memory. He was tall, with this deep voice that made you feel like he could solve any problem. But he never stuck around long enough to actually teach me. It was just me and my mom, and she did her best. But there are some things a single mom can't really teach a teenage boy. So I turned to what I saw on TV and in movies to try and figure things out. I grew up on a steady diet of those classic rom-coms and sitcoms where the dorky, awkward guy always ends up with the girl after some over-the-top grand gesture. You know the ones. Standing outside her window with a boombox or running through the airport to stop her from getting on the plane. I thought that was how love worked, that if you just did enough, made a big enough effort, the girl you liked would eventually have to like you back. And man, did I try! In high school, I remember putting together this whole elaborate plan to ask out this girl, Lisa. I made this stupid video, full of inside jokes and memories, and I even got her favorite band song in the background. I spent weeks on it, editing it after school in the computer lab, thinking it was going to blow her away. When I finally showed it to her, she smiled politely, said it was sweet, and then... no, she didn't even seem all that impressed. I was crushed. I thought I'd done everything right, poured my heart and soul into this grand gesture, and it still didn't work out. I felt humiliated, but I didn't learn my lesson. If anything, it just made me double down. I figured the problem wasn't that I was doing too much. It was that I wasn't doing enough. I thought if I tried harder, did more, eventually someone would notice me the way I wanted them to. It was like being stuck in this loop, making the same mistakes over and over, but expecting different results. Without a dad or any other solid male figure to pull me aside and say, "Hey, you're going about this all wrong," I just kept going down that path. It wasn't like I didn't have male influences around. There were coaches, teachers, and my mom's occasional boyfriends. But none of them ever took the time to talk to me about this stuff. They'd tell me to focus on school or sports, but they never really got into the nitty-gritty of how to navigate relationships, or even how to handle rejection. I remember this one coach I had in high school football. Coach Jenkins was this big, burly guy who seemed like he knew everything there was to know about being a man. One day, after practice, I kind of worked up the courage to ask him for advice. I told him there was this girl I liked, and I didn't know how to get her to notice me. He just chuckled, slapped me on the back, and said, "Just be confident, son. Girls like confidence." And that was it. No follow-up, no real advice, just be confident. I was left standing there, feeling more confused than ever. What did that even mean, be confident? How was I supposed to be confident when I felt like I didn't have anything to offer? I needed someone to really sit down with me and explain that confidence isn't about pretending to be something you're not or putting on this showy front. It's about being comfortable with who you are, flaws and all. But nobody told me that. So I kept putting on this act, thinking that if I just played the role well enough, everything would fall into place. It wasn't until college that I started to unravel all of this. I took this psychology course, just as an elective to fill out my schedule. One of the first things the professor talked about was how our perceptions of relationships and gender roles are shaped by the media we consume and the people around us. It was like someone had flipped on a light switch in my brain. I realized that all those movies and TV shows I'd been watching had given me this warped idea of what relationships were supposed to be like. I'd been trying to live up to some Hollywood script instead of just being myself. I started to see how messed up my thinking had been. I wasn't trying to connect with these girls as people. I was trying to play out some fantasy where I was the hero, swooping in to save the day. I thought I was being the good guy, the dependable, but really I was just being a doormat, hoping that if I let people walk all over me enough times, they'd suddenly decide they liked me. I'd like to say that realization was enough to change everything overnight. But it wasn't. Old habits die hard. I still caught myself falling into those same patterns sometimes, offering to help with something just because I thought it might get me a few brownie points, or going out of my way to do things I didn't really want to do just to stay in someone's good graces. But the difference was, I was aware of it now. I could catch myself and ask, Am I doing this because I want to, or because I'm hoping for something in return? And when I could answer honestly, it made a huge difference. I stopped trying to impress people who weren't interested in me, stopped trying to win affection with these calculated moves. I started being honest about what I wanted and what I was willing to give. And it was tough at first because I felt like I was losing this game I'd been playing for so long. But the truth is, it was a game I could never win. I started focusing on building real connections, not just with girls I liked, but with everyone in my life. I put more effort into my friendships, tried to be more present with my family, and just generally started living in a way that felt more authentic. It wasn't about trying to get something out of every interaction. It was about being genuine and seeing where that took me. And slowly but surely, things started to change. I met people who liked me for me, not for what I could do for them. I stopped feeling like I was constantly on the outside looking in because I wasn't trying to force my way into people's lives anymore. I was just being myself, and the right people naturally gravitated towards that. It's crazy how much easier things get when you stop trying so hard. When you're not constantly calculating your every move, wondering if it'll make someone like you more. When you're just honest about who you are and what you want. It's like this huge weight is lifted off your shoulders. You stop caring so much about what other people think, and you start focusing on what actually makes you happy. The best advice I could give to young guys who find themselves in that same nice guy trap is this. It's okay to put yourself first when it comes to romance. It took me years to figure that out. Society tells us that being a good guy means sacrificing your own wants and needs for others, especially in relationships. We're taught to believe that selflessness is the highest virtue, and on the surface, that sounds great. But what they don't tell you is that there's a difference between genuine selflessness and what I was doing, being dishonestly selfless. See, I wasn't actually being a nice guy because I wanted to help. I was doing it because I wanted something in return. I was putting on this mask of selflessness to get girls to like me. I'd hear about their problems and jump in to offer my help, not because I genuinely wanted to solve those problems, but because I thought it would make them see me as this amazing, dependable guy who would do anything for them. I wasn't being kind. I was being manipulative, even if I didn't realize it at the time. The truth is, most of the people you're chasing aren't sitting there waiting for you to come along and make their lives easier. They're just living their lives, making choices based on what they want, not what you're offering. They've got their own stuff going on, their own priorities. If they need help, they'll ask for it. And if they're not asking you, it's because they're not looking to you for that help. It's a hard pill to swallow when you're used to thinking that if you just do enough, try hard, people will eventually appreciate. But the alternative to being honestly selfish is being dishonestly selfless, pretending to be something you're not to get something you want. And that just doesn't work. It doesn't help anybody, and it certainly doesn't make you happy in the long run. When I started putting myself first, I worried it made me seem selfish, but I realized there's a good kind of selfishness. An honest kind. It's about being clear with yourself and others about what you want and what you're willing to give. It's not about manipulating situations or people to get your way. It's about being honest about your intentions and respecting other people's boundaries as well as your own. I stopped bending over backwards for girls who didn't feel the same way about me. If I liked someone and it seemed like there was mutual interest, I'd put myself out there. But I wouldn't keep pushing if it didn't go any. If a girl I liked mentioned she was moving or needed help with something and we weren't really connecting, I'd just wish her luck and move on. I didn't need to be her savior. I needed to be me. And if that wasn't enough, then so be it. This mindset shift freed up so much time and energy. I stopped obsessing over why things didn't work out or what I could have done differently. I stopped trying to be this perfect guy who was always there, always ready to jump in and help, and started focusing on things that actually mattered to me. I put more effort into my studies, got serious about my fitness, and took up hobbies I'd been interested in for a while, but never had the time for, like learning to play the guitar. And the funny thing is, once I stopped trying so hard, things started to fall into place naturally. I met people who were interested in me, not in what I could do. I made genuine friends who liked me for who I was, not for the favors I could do. I started dating girls who were interested in me from the start, not ones I had to convince over months of doing things for. It felt easy in a way that it never had before. I remember this one girl, Katie. We met through mutual friends, and right off the bat, there was a connection. We went out for coffee, and the conversation just flowed. I wasn't worried about impressing her or saying the right things. I was just being myself, talking about my interests and asking about hers. At the end of the night, I didn't offer to help her with anything or try to win her over with some grand gesture. I just told her I had a great time and that I'd like to see her again. She smiled and said she'd like that too. It was such a small thing, but it felt huge to me. I wasn't pretending, I wasn't pushing. I was just there, being myself, and that was enough. We ended up dating for a while, and even though it didn't work out in the end, it was one of the first relationships I'd had that felt balanced and genuine. We liked each other for who we were, not for what we could do for each other. Looking back, learning this lesson saved me from so much frustration and heart. It freed me from this exhausting cycle of trying to win people over, of feeling like I had to earn their affection by being something I wasn't. It gave me the freedom to just be me and to let people like or dislike me for that. I wish someone had told me this earlier, but I'm glad I figured it out when I did. I see so many young guys falling into that same trap, thinking they have to prove themselves to girls, or that being nice means always putting others first, no matter how it makes them feel. And I want to grab them by the shoulders and shake them and say, stop. Just be yourself. Don't do things for people who don't care about. Don't waste your energy trying to make people like you. It's not worth it. It's not about giving up on being a good person. It's about being a good person for the right reasons. Be kind because you want to be kind, not because you want something out of it. Help people because you genuinely want to help, not because you think it'll make them like you. And don't be afraid to walk away if it's not working. Putting yourself first isn't selfish in a bad way, it's just being honest. And that's the best thing you can be.